Allora, buon pomeriggio a tutti. So che mi sentite, ma si tratta del filmato, quindi parlerò un po' più forte del normale. Oggi abbiamo, e non è diciamo, qualcosa che dico così con tutti i docenti, lo sapete, abbiamo il grande, direi onore, di avere con noi per questo seminario di oggi e poi giovedì mattina la professoressa Margarita DIAZ-ANDREU. Devo dire che io la professoressa DIAZ-ANDREU la conosco da un anno praticamente, non molto di più. Quando ho saputo, ero negli Stati Uniti, quando ho saputo che l'avrei trovata in un convegno mi sono realmente emozionata, perché è una tra le docenti diciamo del Mediterraneo, spagnola in questo caso, più importanti a livello europeo. Margarita è conosciuta in tutta Europa, soprattutto lei è di formazione preistorica, ha fatto i suoi studi nell'Università di Madrid sull'archeologia del periodo preistorico, ma è la più grande studiosa che esiste in Europa sulla storia degli studi dell'archeologia, cioè la storiografia relativa all'archeologia. Sapete, per chi fa le sue tesi, quando lavorate su qualsiasi aspetto, vi ho detto 1000 volte, non solo è importante conoscere il materiale, ma chi ha studiato quel materiale, perché lo ha fatto, qual era il contesto politico, sociale, economico in cui qualcuno stava scrivendo. Tutti noi lavoriamo all'interno di un contesto politico. Basta vedere quello che sta succedendo adesso in Siria, eccetera. Ha cambiato completamente la nostra percezione di quello che erano le invasioni durante i nazionalismi. Alcuni fenomeni si vedevano in un modo che oggi ci sembrano completamente superati. Se non capiamo quel contesto storico-politico, perdiamo gran parte del senso di quello che è la nostra storia. E quindi qualsiasi libro, monografia, miscellanea, eccetera, su questa tematica è stata realizzata da lei. E come è un tema importantissimo, molto difficile a trattare, è conosciuta fondamentalmente per questo. E negli ultimi anni ha anche fatto, diciamo, un upgrade molto importante nelle istituzioni archeologiche europee, fa parte del comitato, del board dell'European Association of Archaeologists, che come sapete è la più importante organizzazione di archeologi europei che esiste, non direi non solo in Europa, ma nel mondo. E penso un po', magari ce lo spiega lei, dovuto a questo suo coinvolgimento nelle istituzioni nel mondo dell'archeologia pubblica, ha cominciato anche da alcuni anni a studiare proprio aspetti relativi a queste questioni, e cioè cosa è il patrimonio, come il patrimonio è sentito dalla popolazione, cosa sono le istituzioni legate al patrimonio. Qui torniamo un po' al problema storiografico, cosa è la UNESCO, che cosa sono tutte queste istituzioni che creano, che ci fanno capire quali sono i luoghi importanti, perché un sito è UNESCO e un altro non lo è, come questo interessa poi allo sviluppo economico, politico, sociale di un paese. E anche in questo momento sta scrivendo proprio un libro su un aspetto derivato da questa questione, che è il nazionalismo, l'archeologia e il turismo e il colonialismo. Lei sta lavorando anche a Barcellona, dopo i suoi studi a Madrid, nell'Università autonoma, ha passato 16 anni in Inghilterra, nell'Università di Durham, e negli ultimi 4 anni ha ottenuto un posto molto importante per la Spagna. Ci sono una serie di istituzioni che diciamo, contrattano ai migliori docenti di più eccellenza, spagnoli o stranieri, che sono in Europa, per far salire, diciamo, la qualità delle università del nostro paese. Lei è stata reclutata dall'Università di Barcellona attraverso questa istituzione, l'ICREA, e da quel momento lì è cominciato a lavorare nella mia ex diciamo università. A Barcellona sta facendo anche un grande lavoro con i musei, grandi musei come il museo archeologico, ma anche piccola realtà locali, associazioni locali e gruppi che si occupano della valorizzazione del patrimonio archeologico, e sta facendo anche un lavoro che forse tanto a noi non ci è arrivato, però in Spagna, in Francia, in Inghilterra sono molto importanti, l'uso del patrimonio culturale per solventare o per aiutare a risolvere alcuni problemi della nostra società attuale, come la immigrazione, oltre all'integrazione dei bambini nelle scuole, eccetera. Come il patrimonio può essere un strumento per lavorare su tutte queste questioni. Senza togliergli più tempo, io veramente ringrazio la professoressa DIAZ-ANDREU per averci fatto, ripeto, il grande onore di essere qua con noi. Grazie, ricordate, al Dipartimento che finanzia tutte queste iniziative per la internazionalizzazione della didattica. Lei parlerà in inglese. Io le ho detto che i nostri studenti capiscono perfettamente l'inglese. Spero che tutti voi vi preparate qualche domanda per la fine, perché ricordate, ve lo dico già, ve l'ho detto tante volte, l'archeologia è molto importante, però il futuro di molti di voi può essere proprio orientato su queste questioni: come l'archeologo può e deve aprirsi alla società, alle scuole, alle istituzioni, agli archeologi locali, per riuscire a comunicare e, dopo tutto quello che ci interessa, ottenere dei fondi, fare dei progetti, migliorare, diciamo, il nostro futuro. Quindi grazie mille e buona conferenza.
Grazie, thank you. Yes. Right, I thought that I would better speak in English, because I know that if I speak in Spanish, you would follow more or less, but perhaps you are more used to hear English than Spanish. So I will do my talk in English. And so thank you very much to Alessandra, thank you very much to the department, to the University of Padua for having invited me. And thank you very much for this fantastic introduction. I don't know whether I deserve it, but you will judge now. Right, what I'm going to talk to you today is World Heritage and local communities. And what I'm going to do is what has been done and the challenges ahead. And this is the first talk. As you know, I will be talking also on Thursday about tourism, nationalism, colonialism, but today this is World Heritage is my talk. Right, so I'm going to divide my talk into these points. So first I'm going to give you an introduction of what is World Heritage, because you might not know. So I'm going to just give you some guidelines of what it's about and how World Heritage sites or locations are selected. So with two steps. The first one is nomination, the second one inscription. Then we will, I will move on to social participation with a historical background, then how it was looked at, dealt with in World Heritage, and then we will go to a case study and see whether it is working or not. So what is World Heritage? World Heritage is UNESCO was created in 1945. UNESCO means United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. When it was created, it was mainly dealing with education and with culture in general, but there were sort of small projects, many of them had to do with children and so on. But something happened in 1959, and that was that the Egyptian government decided to build the Aswan Dam. And that meant that many monuments were going to be underwater, were threatened to be underwater and therefore not visitable. And that led to an international campaign to save all those monuments. And because of the international cooperation, because it worked pretty well, they decided to create something that was the World Heritage Convention. So the idea behind it, and this happened in 1972, the idea behind the World Heritage Convention that is part of UNESCO was to save major monuments around the world, and that could be either natural monuments or cultural monuments, and to save them from threats. So UNESCO or the World Heritage Convention hasn't got any money for this. Is that the states agree to protect these sites. It's an agreement. The World Heritage hasn't got any money for that. So the first World Heritage sites were designated in 1978. And you have here the 4 first ones of the list. The Galapagos Islands, that's, because it is natural heritage. Then the city of Quito in Peru, the cathedral at Aachen, and a place, again, a natural place in Canada. So you have this mixture of natural and cultural sites. What do they have to have, these sites, these properties, as they are also called, to be World Heritage? What they have to have is outstanding universal values. And so other sites can be protected at a local level, at a regional level, at a national level, state level, but in order to be considered as World Heritage, they have to have this key thing that is outstanding universal values. That is World Heritage. So the idea to begin with was that World Heritage were going to be about 100 places in the world, so a very sort of restricted list. So how are these sites selected? And this could be 1 hour of talk. I'm just going to give you a couple of ideas because they are going to be important for what I'm going to say later. There are some operational guidelines. That means that the guidelines, the rules on the basis on which these sites are selected and then managed are in these operational guidelines. So this is a very important document that is revised every year, and that is used to prepare the nominations and is used also to manage World Heritage properties. There are sort of some guidelines, then there are many other guidelines and so on. But these ones are especially important. And the new, then all these are revised into the annual session of the World Heritage Committee that happens once a year, usually around summer. And you have a photograph of one of the recent ones. The process then has many steps, but I think that we can the process of selection, we can divide them, or we can summarize them into 2 major steps. The first one happens at the state level, and at the state level, a selection of sites or properties go onto the list to be nominated. So there is a decision on the state parties at the state level to decide which site or which number of sites will be selected, will be nominated. And those nominated then go to the World Heritage Committee, and a few of them at the world level will move on to the list. So there are 2 steps, the nomination and the designation. And as you can see, if the idea started with, okay, we will have 100 places, in the end, there are more than 1,000, and it is increasing more and more. There are there's a majority of cultural sites. There are some, there are natural sites, but they are not as common. And there are a few sites that are mixed. So they can be inscribed because they have outstanding values, both in natural and in for cultural and for natural reasons. And when there is a problem, so the state is not protecting the site, the committee may decide to put them on a special list, and the red list of the list of sites or properties in danger. Okay, and they can even take them out of the list. So this is just as a background for you to know what I am going to discuss later. I also thought that I had to give you some background knowledge on social participation, when social participation started to be important. Because if we go to the 19th century, social participation wasn't a key thing at all, or the start of the 20th century. So when one of the first authors to discuss values related to heritage, who was Alois Riegel in 1903, when he wrote what is a leaflet, really. So, you know, I think it has sort of 40 pages or so. This is a copy that I found in Frankfurt of that publication of 1903. Right, when he wrote sort of a booklet on what was the value, why we have to protect heritage. You know, he was the president of the Central Commission for Research and Preservation of Artistic and Historic Monuments in Austria. And, you know, why should the state pay to preserve all those sites? So he wrote a sort of philosophical almost essay on why. And but of the values that he selected as important for this preservation to happen, the idea behind everything was that the experts knew about it. The experts knew what should be saved, but not necessarily people. You know, people, you shouldn't ask people, why should they? They really don't know. It is something that we experts know, what should be saved, because we have a knowledge. So it's the middle classes really are the ones, or the provenance of middle or well-off classes, that have to control about what to save and so on. And very much related also at the end of the day with nationalism and so on. But that's another story I'm not going to go into. Right. When then social issues started to be important, we could go a bit earlier than the Second World War, but really sort of, you know, in between the wars, in the interwar period. But what happened in the Second World War was so serious, so deeply, not sure how to say, that that meant that that had a lot of consequences on the thought of, in particular, in social participation. So this massive extermination of Jews, Gypsies, other groups, meant that there was a crisis of values, and all these things were thought again. And this is very much connected also with movements like the Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, and then to all a series of movements like decolonization after the Second World War, about which I'm not going to discuss today, or in fact the civil rights movement of people of color, of women, and of indigenous people. That's the moment when they started, and that has a lot to do with what happened in the Second World War. And then also, as you know, even the creation of UNESCO is very much linked to all that. Is 1945 is one of the consequences of the Second World War. So, what has been social participation in World Heritage? Right. As you know, one of the World Heritage started in 1972, and it's because of outstanding universal value. Very soon after World Heritage started, but it's not World Heritage, it's something to do with UNESCO. They had a recommendation on the participation by the people at large, it said, in the cultural life and their contribution to it. So there are also already in the 70s some movements starting to say, come on, people have to participate in culture. It's not that a selection of experts decide what culture is, and they have to integrate people, but you have to ask people. And we already find this in 76 in UNESCO. So because World Heritage, the World Heritage Convention is part of UNESCO, in a way, UNESCO should have been affected by it. And what it says in that recommendation is participation by the greatest possible number of people and associations in a wide variety of cultural activities of their own free choice is essential to the development of the basic human values and dignity of the individual. Access by the people at large to cultural values can be assured only if social and economic conditions are created that will enable them not only to enjoy the benefits of culture, but also to take an active part in the overall cultural life and in the process of cultural development. So all that is already there in 1976. So, but, however, the implication is still, if you read this, could be that, okay, people have to be taken into account, but the experts are the ones who should be organizing things. It's not that the experts should organize things just for experts, but what this is saying, or it could be interpreted in this way, is you experts have to create things for the people. So it's still, if you want, a top-down approach. So, all the exhibitions and so on that were organized, this is a photograph of when the Guernica was brought to the Prado Museum in after 1981. So you have to create you have to organize things so that people can enjoy. In this case, Spanish people can enjoy the Guernica and so on. So it's not only archaeology that I'm talking about; it's much wider than that. At the UN level, and you have to remember that UNESCO is part of the UN, or is connected to the UN. In 1987, we have this commission, this Brundtland Commission, that published Our Common Future. And this is the first time, as far as I know, in which a bottom-up approach is encouraged in order to sort of, recent, because this is it is helping, or would be helping, sustainable management of environmental resources. So the idea starts with environmental resources, with the idea of nature. If you want to preserve nature, you really have to take into account people, but also, you know, ask people, or people really should make decisions. And if you ask people to do things, and then you take their opinions into account, if you create a bottom-up project, that will help to sustain the natural world. But obviously the natural world is not empty. It has people living in it. And this affects very clearly places with indigenous populations. So immediately it was connected with indigenous communities and so on. So this is 87. 5 years later, we have the World Congress on Sustainable Development in Rio de Janeiro. And again, we find similar recommendations there. And all these will affect then in World Heritage. So these will affect World Heritage first in 1995. In 1995, for the first time, the operational guidelines speak about the participation of local people in the nomination process to make, and the idea is that if people are taken into account when these nominations are made, then they will then help assist in the preservation of the site. So from 1995, therefore, the local communities should be asked or encouraged to participate in the process of nominating a new site. 5 years later, there was one of these World Heritage Committee meetings, and it happened in Cairns in Australia. And there was a parallel forum made by indigenous groups, and they were very unhappy of how World Heritage was being managed. Because, obviously, many of these World Heritage places are in their lands. And they can be considered as natural places, they can be considered as, I don't know, in the case of rock art, you know, it can be ritual places for them, but everything was being done without their consent. So there was a lot of unhappiness in Cairns, and because of all the protests, there were then some consequences in the way of declarations and conventions. So, what are these conventions? We have the Budapest Declaration, we have the Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage, and the Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions. I'm not going to go into all of them, but just to explain that in the Budapest Declaration, there was this thing about the 4 C's. So the World Heritage had to be credible, so credibility, conservation, capacity building, communication. So that World Heritage had to be all about that. And then in New Zealand, another C was added, that was community. So communication with people, capacity building, you know, with taking into account local communities, all that was inserted into all these C's, but in 2007 another one was added, that was community. So the operational guidelines had been changed in 95, and they were changed again in 2008. And a step was made that went beyond. So local communities, so it's not only indigenous communities, but it's wider, the concept is indigenous communities and local communities, because, you know, at the end of the day, we are all local communities. So in 2008, the operational guidelines were changed again, and they said not only local communities should not only be taken into account in the nomination, but they should also be taken into account in the management of World Heritage. So, in a way, there's a lot of movements in the world, not only in World Heritage, but also outside it, this, you know, of increasing communication, increasing collaboration between local communities and places, World Heritage places, and in other cases they are not. For example, in Australia, like this Uluru Kata Tuta National Park, that in fact was changed, the name changed because of a request by local communities. And also in the US, this is very important, that local communities, indigenous communities, are increasingly taken into account, not only in World Heritage, but also in other types of sites. Or, for example, this is taken to a new world of research, like this one in Palestine. This is also related to World Heritage, because a nomination wants to be made, and this is sort of archaeologists. These are archaeologists from the University of Leiden, who are interviewing local communities and asking them what they think and how they like the site, that particular site, to be presented, and so on. So local communities are increasingly being taken into account. And there is a huge amount of publications that the World Heritage Committee is encouraging about these social and also economic aspects, the social and economic impact of research. However, what does it mean, local participation? So I've presented now the nice side of things, and right, or I'll wait for my however. No, it's what it means by local participation. In 2005, there were more clarification, because it seemed that people were not clear about what local participation meant, and then the operational guidelines really spell out everything. Right, so summarizing about the rules, 76, the first recommendation by UNESCO, 95, the first time the operational guidelines mention local communities, and it's related to nominations. 2008, they mention local communities in relation with management, World Heritage management, the management of World Heritage sites or properties, and then 2005, several clarifications, right? Okay, so now we are going to see what happens in practice. So we have this, my case study is going to be one of my other fields of research, which is rock art, prehistoric rock art. So when I started to think about this, I thought, okay, I'm going to combine in this way here, in this talk, I'm combining three of my fields, because I've given you some history of archaeology, I've given you some heritage, and I'm going to use some of the information from rock art. I'm not going to talk about acoustics and other things that I do, but rock art. Okay, so how many properties are there in the World Heritage List in Spain that are related to rock art? There are three. The Coa Valley and Sierra Verde, that is a mixed Portugal-Spain. Then Altamira, which was extended to other caves in the north of Spain. And then the rock art of the Mediterranean area that covers a huge amount of area. Right, let's have a look. First site. The first site then is going to be the earliest one, Altamira. Altamira was put on the list, or included on the list, in 1985. That means before any of these guidelines, on the operational guidelines, were added. So what we could see is that the Altamira cave was, had already been for many years as one of the manifestations, and I don't know why it has disappeared, the rest of the sentence, but the idea was one of the manifestations of Spanish nationalism and so on. So everybody was happy about Altamira being World Heritage. It's sort of, okay, of course, it's, the 16 chapel of prehistory and so on. Right. But yeah, local communities were not asked at all. And why should they? There were no guidelines. Okay. But then in 2008, it was extended. The people, others in the north of Spain, they said, Altamira is one cave, but we have fantastic caves here. They wanted to do another nomination, but then they thought, no, let's do an extension of the nomination. So they did that, and in 2008 they were successful, and the property now includes 18, I think it's 18 sites, caves, Paleolithic caves in northern Spain with paintings. So at that time, people should have been asked not only about the nomination, but also they should be included, or some mention should have been done, although perhaps there is a question here if the operational guidelines were in 2008, perhaps not in when the nomination was put forward, but later. So, but however, there is no evidence that people were consulted about the nomination again, and at that time they should have been consulted. And although there's some evidence about local participation, and what do I mean by some evidence of local participation in the management? And what I mean is there is a patronato, which was created, in fact, in 1940, so much earlier. So it isn't that it has been created because World Heritage has asked this to be done, but it was there. And there's some cooperation. Then I asked the people in Altamira. I've been asking them, and yes, there has been some. There's some cooperation with the local town council, which is Santillana del Mar, in the case of Altamira, or with the local business association. And very recently, they asked a group in Spain, the INCIPIT group in Santiago de Compostela, to do a work study on the social value of Altamira. And the social value, it is on the web now, everything that they did. So in a way, they are thinking about it. They're thinking about social value. But what they did was more or less study what the situation was. Not, what I feel in that project is that there are no recommendations on how to take into account local communities. It's just a study, how Altamira has been looked in the local schools, in the school books, whether the public likes the museum, and so on, but not really recommendations for the future. That's what, as far as I can see. And it's a fantastic work, okay? Second site. Let's see whether this is a pattern or not. The rock art of the western of the Mediterranean. Then this was in 1998, and therefore the nomination, the operational guidelines to take into account local communities for the nomination were already approved. But again, you go to the documentation, there's no evidence that people were consulted about the nomination, and no evidence that people are consulted about the management. So if you go to the nomination, you know, you see the photographs of the time, all the meetings taking place to decide about the nomination. There's only experts. It's the committee that was formed, you know, where are the local communities? So the nomination went ahead, and it was successful. It was designed, it was included in the World Heritage Site, and then when, you know, the World Heritage Sites or properties have to go through a periodic report. And this was done in 2014, and if you can read there, it says, when it says local communities, residents, and please rate the cooperation, and they say fair. So, you know, what does it mean, fair? Okay, and when it says something, if present, do local communities resident in or near the World Heritage property and or buffer zone has an input in the management? And then the answer is local communities directly contribute to some decisions relating to management. Okay, what does it mean? Nothing. To say this and nothing if you don't have to provide evidence? Of course, I would say the same. Okay? That's it, okay? And all these documents are public. They are on the web, if you know how to find them. Right, third site, the Coa Valley, which is in Portugal, 1948. Again, no evidence that people were consulted. In fact, if they had been consulted, it would never have been World Heritage, because people were furious, because they wanted the dam. Okay, because that meant, they thought that they meant jobs, and they were very unhappy about the World Heritage designation. So this is Foscoa with all these Paleolithic engravings in the rocks and so on. And some of the managers, not that, so in 2006, when the management was something that the operational guidelines already said, local communities have to be part of the management. These guys said, in fact, they said, really, we don't want to. This is more or less what these two paragraphs say. If we really take into account local communities, sometimes local communities say things that we don't want to hear. This is basically what they say. Okay. So that they are not trained, why should they? And then when the nomination was extended to add one of the sites on the other side of the frontier, Sierra Verde, which is in Spain, then there's no evidence that people were consulted. But in this case, if I go to the articles and so on, it seems that, you know, there are local businesses which are having some advantage of showing so some businesses that are with tourists and so on. So we could say, okay, that at least there is some benefit for the local communities. So I'm going to conclude here. And what I would like to conclude, or as a summary, I would say, yes, there has been some movement towards social participation with roots in World War II. The UNESCO and World Heritage Convention have been part of this movement. So UNESCO first in 1976 through a declaration, and then the World Heritage Convention through these operational guidelines in 95, and then with, again, a change in the operational guidelines, not only to include nomination, you know, the participation of local communities in the nomination of the sites, which was in 95, but also in the management of the sites, which is 2008 and 2015. However, the interpretation of how these World Heritage operational guidelines is varied. And if you go to Turkey, for example, they think, I mean, in Europe, this is very common. They say, oh, local communities is the town council. If we take into account the town council represents the people because they have been elected. So I don't have to take into account the people with the local, with the town council, with the authorities, the local authorities will be fine, which sometimes happens and sometimes it doesn't. But anyway, so there's interpretation of how this can be. These local communities have to be interpreted. And in the case studies that I have analyzed, and I think they would be very common if you use it for medieval, any sites with medieval World Heritage sites that have a medieval chronology, I don't think that you would find something very different. So, in the case studies analyzed, the way in which the role of local communities is allowed or has been used has not changed much. If you analyze it, hasn't changed much of what was happening before 95, as we saw with Altamira. Really, the patronato existed and continues to exist. Yes, there has been this work on the social value of Altamira, but without recommendations of changes to be made. And now we should ask ourselves why. Why this situation is happening, and I would give, we could answer this in two different ways, and then I will go beyond. On the one hand, the state parties don't feel that there is a need for implementing these operational guidelines. If nobody is telling you, if you have this report, as I showed you, the 2014, and you say fair and nobody cares, why should you care? If the World Heritage Committee is not caring, why should you be caring? If that costs money, all these, and it costs a change of mentality, which is. So one of the reasons is the state parties are not interested, don't feel that there's a need to really take into account all these operational guidelines. And the second reason would be the World Heritage Committee that is not imposing its own rules. Okay? And now we could say, okay, fine, why? Why is this happening? Why World Heritage is not imposing its own rules? And then I could use this article by Willem Willems, who was one of the major names in heritage, World Heritage and in heritage in general, who died a couple of years ago, or a few months ago. And he says something like, the World Heritage Convention of UNESCO, which celebrated its 40th anniversary in 2012, was intended to promote the preservation and enjoyment of world's most important natural and cultural heritage. It is now fast losing credibility. Okay, it says it's a loss of credibility because of political maneuvering and the inscription of sites that do not meet requirements for reasons of prestige and tourist development. So why is this happening? So he was in particular very upset because he was in ICOMOS, and ICOMOS is one of the bodies that should advise UNESCO. But it is increasingly the case that the opinions of ICOMOS are not taken into account, because World Heritage nowadays is business, because it has to do with tourism, and it has to do with a lot of money and with economy. So, and this is what he says. So he's saying ICOMOS is not being taken into account, although he doesn't mention ICOMOS here. That role, so the role of improve heritage management, that role is increasingly taken up by international corporations and banks. And globally, we may well be seeing a shift from state-based frameworks that all go back to a European way of dealing with heritage, a regime to a global and transnational heritage regime. At the same time, which shouldn't be I mean, I wouldn't be unhappy about that in principle. But he says, he follows, at the same time, existing infrastructure and legislation in Western countries is under scrutiny as a result of financial crisis and economic recession. So he was linking all this with the economic recession. It went beyond that, and it was related with politics and with the US not paying for UNESCO. So what we are seeing here basically is the privatization of culture. That means that all these nice ideas about social participation at the end of the day are being curtailed by economic interests. And this is why the World Heritage Committee has no power whatsoever to impose its own rules. Thank you.
Che la elezione di un sito UNESCO venga praticamente quello che ci ha detto, stabilito nei nostri giorni in rapporto agli interessi economici delle multinazionali, comunque come tutto, cioè non è una cosa che mi sorprende particolarmente, però è parecchio grave. Secondo me è molto interessante anche la parte, su quello che oggi ci riempiamo tutti la bocca e parliamo tanto e siamo tanto entusiasti, la partecipazione sociale, quanto l'università deve aprirsi alla gente eccetera. Poi è qualcosa che già parte dall'inizio di secolo con Alois Riegel e comunque dagli anni 70 si sta insistendo su questo. A qui la maggior parte di accademici comunque fanno, come si dice? Orecchie, esatto, quindi bisogna pensarci. Io intanto che non mi viene in mente qualche domanda, sì è vero ed è assolutamente necessario che la gente partecipi in tutte queste lezioni, perché se la gente non vede il patrimonio come qualcosa di suo, di qualcosa che hanno scelto loro e con il quale si sentono identificati o legati, sarà impossibile che quei paesaggi o beni culturali vengano protetti. Che ci partecipano nelle associazioni locali, i stakeholders, le piccole ditte, anche i ristoranti, tutto, che tutti abbiano una partecipazione, però teniamo anche conto che questo non vuol dire, come sta succedendo in alcuni posti, che questa partecipazione locale e questo mondo economico locale che aiuta alla protezione e alla difesa di tutto questo ignori comunque la parte degli esperti, perché se l'esperto non è parte, comunque l'esperto siamo tutti noi in alcuni casi, per la natura saranno i botanici eccetera. Se l'esperto non fa parte di questi comiti o di queste decisioni o del management poi di questi beni culturali, li svuotiamo completamente del suo contenuto. Quindi più che in un'altra cosa questo tipo di decisione deve essere qualcosa di preso dalla parte da tutti, sì, comunità locali, lo sapete che io su questo sono perfettamente d'accordo, però senza esagerare, perché dopo passiamo alla creazione di monumenti, siti UNESCO e patrimonio culturale vuoto di qualsiasi contenuto. Professoressa La Rocca.
Hi Margherita.
So the first one, both things, I should say, no, there are things that I have to look a bit further, because I've just practically started to work with this. I've been asking, but yeah, I need more, and there's a lot of research to be done on what is behind all this. I guess that the answer to the first one would be that there was, as in 1976, you see that there is some interest in people, okay? So that is there. But then there's the civil rights movement in relation with indigenous populations. So there are two parallel things there that at some point conflate, because I think that it is wise not to give priority to the indigenous people in a legislation and forget about local communities, because at the end of the day we all are indigenous peoples. However, I think that what I've seen is that it is specified. I think that indigenous peoples are lobbying a lot for that term to be kept together with local communities, because, and they might be right, if they are not kept as a separate term, they can be diluted and they can lose rights. And in this question of rights, we are talking here about rights to land, rights to money, funds, and so on. So for them it is very important to be kept as a separate term, even if they could be included. But I understand why they want to keep it separate.
Yeah, in some cases, there's a big difference between indigenous people in Australia, in America, in Central
And then
America, and the communities which occupy that place. So in Australia, I know there are big problems continuously between the rights of the local communities and the rights of the indigenous.
yeah, it is very complex, because in some cases Western populations are older than the indigenous communities because they were moved to that place, whereas the original indigenous community was moved somewhere else. So it's a question of deciding who has the right and on what basis, whether it is genetic or cultural. And so it's a very complex issue here. The second question, sorry, I know that there's a book on the history of UNESCO, but the first years. I feel that there is much to do on the history of UNESCO after that. What I have put together in this, this is going to be an article, what I've put together here, it has been finding information here and there, sort of piecemeal, but I haven't got into the archives and I haven't started to do interviews. But it is the moment, because the people who were there in 76, 72, they are very old now. So it would be the moment to start doing oral history with them before they disappear. That generation disappears. And the archives, they are all there. the problem here, I don't know, I can answer in Spanish or in English, not in Italian. I'm sorry. But what would you prefer? Shall I go English? Yeah. The problem here is that there hasn't been, in all these processes, if you don't organize it properly, there is one group that might be very loud, shouting or making a lot of noise, and they are not necessarily representative. So all these processes of local participation have to be done properly and managed by people who are prepared for it, anthropologists, sociologists, or even in the case of archaeologists, but archaeologists who are, who have been trained into doing that. And it is a question that because the World Heritage Committee is not interested and it is not imposing this, then students are not trained, staff is not trained to do this, and there is a feeling of lack of need of knowing how all these processes should take place. So we have a situation in which all these operational guidelines, all these nice words are put into documents, but nobody's really doing the work that should be done in order to do these processes in the right way. So there are a few groups like the one now in this INCIPID group that I have explained about, that did this work on Altamira. They have, these are archaeologists, but they have, in their group, they have now anthropologists and so on. So they are starting to work on that, and they are now involved into processes of local participation with heritage in their local region, in Galicia, northwest Spain. But I haven't seen this happening in Andalusia, and I haven't seen this happening in any of the other places. We need training, and is the feeling that we really need that training is not there.
Purtroppo la UNESCO e questa storia dell'heritage e dei siti si sta vedendo come non hanno nessun potere in realtà e nemmeno tanta voglia di applicarlo. Cioè, io sono stata un paio di mesi fa in Panama, siti, c'hanno il casco antico, la parte vecchia della città è patrimonio UNESCO e la stanno distruggendo per costruire boutique di lusso, ma uno dietro l'altro. Ma la stessa gente locale non è d'accordo con questo perché sta perdendo l'identità dei suoi edifici, stanno copiando la Habana vecchia e non è così che era. Però è in questo elemento che entra il ruolo delle comunità locali, ma anche il ruolo nostro, il ruolo degli specialisti che abbiamo o dobbiamo crearci un training. Sarebbe buono che l'università cominciasse anche a fornire questo tipo di training nei beni culturali, non solo la legislazione, se no cosa possiamo fare e come farlo, e farlo anche con le comunità locali e con i locali, le stakeholders, dargli un po' l'idea di come quello può beneficiare poi alla comunità, più tenerlo che distruggerlo, e lavorare tutti insieme. A mio parere un po' il ruolo dell'UNESCO, sì, è un ruolo soprattutto morale e che ti dà delle indicazioni, ma come poi in realtà non fa niente, dobbiamo essere noi e la gente che vive in quei territori che si muova per evitare che quello venga distrutto da sia. Francesca.
She has just answered.
Okay.
Because something similar is happening in Padua. The council is trying to inscribe some buildings with medieval paintings in the World Heritage List. But only some groups are involved in this decision, and the other part of the citizenship is just
invece di tutte le azioni che fate, farle in modo indipendente, ogni volta che c'è un'azione coordinata avrà molto più potere, però è quello che succede un po' con le associazioni locali a volte, che gioca più il io e io faccio che il gruppo e l'impulso, e che a volte non sentono quei monumenti tanto identitari come il suo proprio. Il comitato mural ci le fortificazioni, l'altro le pitture, l'altro invece vuole il salone, quindi
è anche questione di rapporti interpersonali, perché
quello
i gruppi che sono coinvolti comunque hanno relazioni interpersonali con chi sta attentando, per cui
bene. Sì, avanti.
I have just a couple of very naive, very ignorant questions. I have seen in many of your slides the idea of protection of these sites. Somehow you have already told something about that, but I would like to understand what does that mean? Who protects sites? I understand that this road should be mostly proper of the local communities, exactly. And the second one is somehow related. I've also seen a lot of times the word property, but I'm not sure that I correctly understood the use of this word. So the question is, when a site becomes part of World Heritage, who owns it? Who governs it? Who administrates it?
Okay, I'll start by the last one. A site can be World Heritage, and it can be in private hands. It is just what happens is to be considered World Heritage is like an honor. This is really what it is. It's an honor, and the state party is has the compromise of ensure that the site is protected and has authenticity. Then there's all the whole debate about what authenticity means, because when you have to preserve something that has several layers, several chronologies, which one you should preserve, with what materials and so on. So there's a whole debate there that I'm not going to go into. Why the word property is used? Because, for example, with a natural park, you can't say a site. So that's, for example, property is more is a term that has been agreed to mean that. So the protection of, for example, with the extension of Altamira, there are 18, I think it's 18 caves. They are in different hands, in different places, that they are all protected. Or now, the Silk Road in different countries with different sites. Or the Chakpak Nyam or Nakum, which is the Inca route. These are several countries. So you have several sites, and they are all under one property. Then the issue of, I think that in a way I've answered your question of conservation, preservation to do with authenticity and yeah. So that's the idea. Then they decided that each of these sites had to have a buffer zone. A buffer zone meant that, or what it meant to start with, was that if people were living next to the site, they were just cleared. Okay, so that created a lot of problems, and there has been a whole debate on, yes, you need a buffer zone, but what about local communities in this case?
Molto bene, per chi gli abbia molto interessato questo tema, approfitto per fare un po' di pubblicità. Nel prossimo numero della nostra rivista Post Classical Archaeologies, nella quale adesso Margarita DIAZ-ANDREU è parte dell'editorial board, c'è tutto un dossier coordinato da lei sul problema dei siti UNESCO, come questi siti vengono successi in siti UNESCO in tutto il mondo, pure in Italia con i famosi siti UNESCO longobardi. Vedremo cosa c'ha Brogiolo da dirci su questo, come al solito parecchio critico e distruttivo, però sempre interessante a leggerlo. Quindi grazie a tutti voi per essere venuti, spero che vi sia piaciuto, io l'ho trovato molto interessante. Chi gli è piaciuto tantissimo, sapete che prossimo giovedì 8:30 Aula S invece ci parlerà del problema o del tema nazionalismi, colonialismi e turismo archeologico nel corso della triennale, però tutti gli altri siete anche invitati. Grazie.